That's Sam Coe and the track called Moving On. And like I said, this is David Eastaugh on Platform Future Radio's Arts and Culture Show. Now, our next feature. Now, I caught up with a graphic design or graphic artist, Chrisoulis, who just brought out a book, actually, which is titled Tales of the Smiths, a graphic biography. And for those who may not know, the Smiths were a indie pop band from the 80s who lasted for 5 years, made lots of exciting and memorable music, and obviously featured the one and only Morrissey, people like Johnny Marr, Andy Rourke, and also Mike Joyce. But it's an amazing book and an amazing project that Chrisoulis has put together. And I met him recently and began by asking him a little bit more about the background to the book and how it all came into production.
Well, I mean, I became a Smiths fan at a fairly older age than you usually do. I started listening to the Smiths for the first time after I was about 20 or 21, which is really bizarre. Um, because people usually become fans of their music at a much earlier age, usually during their teenage years. That's when their music is more like approachable than the message of the music and the lyrics. Um, but I was totally into totally different types of genres before that, and it's a really long and bizarre story actually how I got into them. I don't know if you want me to get into that.
You don't want to? Oh, that's a shame. That sounds quite
No,
good.
I could get into it if you got the time.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear it because it's always kind of, how does one
Yeah.
discover these things? Yes, so how did you discover
Well,
it?
I mean, when I was much younger, I was into more like 80s, let's say more mainstream rocky stuff, but a lot of metal. And then in the 90s, that kind of progressed when that kind of died out into the grunge scene. I was really into the grunge bands in the early 90s. And I just went through this phase where the Smiths didn't touch me at all. I knew people because I was born and raised in Australia, in Melbourne. And I knew people who that kind of had that Morrissey look and to them because they kind of cosplayed Morrissey a lot after the Smiths' demise, and they just seemed like these weird exotic creatures, delicate creatures, and I was part of this. Large group of first generation or second generation immigrants who just looked and frowned upon these creatures, I suppose. And so it was really weird. And the community was much smaller. The indie types were considered like a fringe part of the music community, I suppose, at the time. Um, Before indie became more popular in the 90s, I suppose. And anyhow, so yeah, Smith's music touched me at all. I mean, at some point after I got into the grunge scene and a lot of and then especially after the Britpop hit it big, everyone was referencing the Smiths and Morrissey all the time. So I was much older then, and I kind of knew that I had to at some point start listening to them. So I mean I did know things like Big Mouth, Big Mouth Strikes Again. I had heard the songs, but I didn't know what the whole ideology was about.
Yes. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
So,
and
yes.
yeah, so it's a quite long story. And then I started working in a video club store after I moved to Athens in Greece, and they had all these unwanted CDs at the back of the video rental club store, and most of them were Smith CDs actually. So I started going through them. I said, I might as well listen to these while I'm, waiting for a customer to come. And I took it in a chronological order, strangely enough, and started listening from the first CD onwards, and it really struck a chord. And I just never listened to anything else for about a year after that.
Excellent. All right. And
Yeah.
this is how you got it. Yeah, so you'd sort of gone from LA glam rock to grunge to
Yeah, I mean, a huge Kiss fan, huge, like 70s Kiss though, like the 80s stuff was great, but 70s Kiss fan, 70s glam rock stuff, um, just anything that was really popular in the 80s.
yes,
Just
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
So look, so putting together this book, and to I'll get you to describe how it is because actually I wouldn't be able to do it justice. So it's a graphic biography of the Smiths, but it's told
Right.
in quite an interesting way, isn't it?
Well, the way I went doing the comic itself and researching it was, I thought, okay, there's two ways of going about actually, which is the most common way is to do a kind of 100 or 150 page biography of a band or a musician, and just go through other people's biographies, check what the info is, and then start illustrating it in your own way and doing like a prose third person narration. And I didn't want to go down that route because it's just been done to death, and I thought I won't provide any new information to fans. So what I did was, because I'd gathered all this huge amount of quotes and obscure interviews from the band, I thought, well, I've got all this information, all this reference, and I could probably use it to make them quote their way through the book through quotes they've made in newspapers and the music press, especially in the 80s. So that was my first initial spark, and the second one was okay. No one ever rarely talks about their true influences, which were indeed 70s glam rock bands and 70s rock musicians and a lot of 60s girl bands. And everyone considers the Smiths as part of this. Now they do this 80s music establishment, whereas their whole background is in 70s glam rock. Strangely enough, because they doesn't look that way, and 60s, kitchen sink dramas and girl bands. So I
Yes.
thought I'd do side stories where these elements would shine through the story. I wouldn't just talk about Morris. I would talk about his idols and their lives and how these influenced the band.
Yeah, and so I mean, it obviously must have taken a long time to sort of collate all that and then put it together, and you did all the drawings as well, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I
So,
did. Yeah.
so how long did that all take?
I mean, prior to the Smiths, I'd already built a career in Athens, Greece, as a comic creator. But I was always searching to do a much larger project, a much more fulfilling project. So they were much shorter projects, and they were really social political in nature. And I thought I could do the social political route, but through another subject which I'd really love, like the Smiths. Anyhow, what happened was right when I moved to England after the financial crisis hit Athens in 2011, a chocolate company, strangely enough, in Athens, Greece, kind of the equivalent of Cadbury in Greece, called Eon, hired me to do a web comic a day per day for their website to promote chocolate to a newer generation. So it's a really bizarre story, and they told me I had like carte blanche, I could do whatever I want. And I said, well, I've got this Smiths thing going on. I don't know if you want to take that up. And they said, yeah. And they were really interested. And I started doing an online comic every day for 3 years, basically, of the story. So that's how I actually managed to do all the pages. It was 450 working days straight of doing one page per day.
God, that's really good discipline, isn't it? When you think.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I'm glad you mentioned kitchen sink dramas because I think it might have been yesterday. I did an interview with Charlotte Delaney, who's
Right.
the daughter of is it Sheena Shirley?
Yes.
And yes, because she's got a big event that's taking place in May, celebrating the 60th anniversary of A Taste of Honey, which obviously
Oh,
is
right.
it is a huge thing at the British Library. So do check that out.
Oh, wow. I will check that out. Yes.
So it's interesting, because I think that's the great thing about the Smiths, which because I was a bit obsessed with John Peel. I say a bit, I was very obsessed with John Peel, and yeah, and the thing is, most bands, and this is what he pointed out as well, and I've also come to respect and understand, is that you kind of don't want to. I mean, when you listen to a lot of bands, you think, God, I can tell what they've listened to. They've just recycled it, so I might also just go and listen to the original because they've either listened to the Beatles, the Stones,
Yeah, right.
et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, it's like you get this diluted version, and for some people
Mm.
like me who get sort of old and a bit bored with. You just want to hear something slightly like, that's really curious, but I have no idea what music they've been brought up or what influences. And the Smiths definitely fell into that category because obviously you then started getting indie bands as the 80s progressed who just sounded a bit like the Smiths, and that was fine. But the Smiths themselves were this kind of the original undiluted band, and you just thought, I would love to know who Johnny Marr used to listen to, or Morrissey, and then obviously with interviews and like you said, you started to
Right.
understand, and a bit like David Bowie, you know, he was this person who would mention authors and painters and films, and then you think, oh,
Right. Yes.
right, I need to go and check these guys out, you know,
Mm.
and so the Smiths had a very similar style in a way, you know, with their culture.
They did, and I mean, they did kind of become mediators for for their audience, this younger generation that knew nothing about the previous generation's music. To get in touch with things like Bowie's, 70s glam albums, and or obscure artists like Jabriath, who Morrissey's obsessed with.
Yes.
There's no way I'd know anything about Jabriath if it wasn't for Morrissey, actually, and I'm a huge Jabriath fan at the moment too. So it's really weird how these things happen, and you'd never expect Morrissey to because they look kind of like ordinary. That's what the Smiths image and the name was all about. Ordinary northern people with no glamorous features on them at all. And you'd never expect, Morrissey to be the president of the UK New York Dolls fan club in the 70s, and that's, a major part of his origin story.
Yes, and it's quite interesting because when he's done collections and compilations of music that were influential to him, again they're like if he does a selection of 12, they're like 12 songs that you would have never ever guessed, and I think that sort of highlights a certain interest. And also Johnny Marr was another person who would reference folk guitarists like Burt Yance or Roy Harper
Constantly.
or Rory Gallagher, and again
Yeah.
these were people that I didn't really sort of have much. I had a little bit of interest, but not that much. But when, obviously Johnny Marr mentions this,
Yeah.
I have to then go away and consume the back catalogue.
And then there's the most bizarre connection, Johnny Marr connection, which is Chic and Nile Rodgers. And no one expect Marr or anyone in the Smiths to be huge funk fans.
This is
And
true.
because it's a band that has absolutely nothing to do with funky disco moves, or that late 70s, early 80s kind of disco movement, and yet he even named his son Johnny Marr even named his son Niall after Nile Rodgers. He's such a huge Chic fan, and actually the band that progressed to become the Smiths, which was Freak Party, which consisted of Johnny Marr, Andy Rourke, and Cy Wollstonecraft, was actually a funk band.
Right.
So
Yes.
it's
So it's interesting as well that you've got a good, I mean, obviously, I do think it's an amazing book. And also, it's nice that you've had, quite a few people, the introduction, and also, like you said, Cy Wollstonecraft as well. So obviously, did you meet Johnny Rogan?
No, I did not meet Johnny Rogan. No, he did do the introduction for the book, and that was actually done through my editor David, because he's been the editor of Johnny's books, that have been published through Omnibus as well. But I have been in contact with Cy Wollstonecraft, and he thankfully did the second introduction to the book.
Yes, which is quite nice as well. And obviously, the book's just coming out, so you won't be able to you don't know the response so far. But obviously, it's going to sort of create quite a lot of interest, isn't it? So are you sort of prepared for that?
Kind of. I mean, it's already been it's already had a lot of press through Pitchfork and NME and things like that due to the pre-sale buzz. And from what I've been told, pre-sales are doing well already. So it's coming out actually tomorrow officially. So I'm still waiting for that the initial reviews and everything. So I
Fantastic.
mean, the community, the Smiths community is going crazy over it. So I'm pretty happy about that. It hasn't been a negative response until now. But they were following the online comic strip, to be fair, for those 3 years, and they kind of really helped. The community really helped keep the strip afloat, and kept me from still working for the chocolate company for 3 years. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this interview, and I'll probably put that on Sunday, but I'll tell you, and then I'll
Oh, great.
podcast it. But again, you know, I just think it's a fantastic. I think it's just an amazing book, and I do think the way you put it together has just been so interesting. That
Yes, thanks a lot. Yeah.
because books are coming out, you know, so quickly. You know, I mean, they always have, haven't they, on books,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
music, and you know, and obviously, you know, sometimes you get them and never look at them, and sometimes
Yeah.
you don't
Well,
bother.
what happened was the book was actually in kind of a pre-production mode for about 3 years. That's the only issue we had. And things like the This Is England, sorry, England Is Mine movie managed to come out before the book. But and Johnny Marr's biography also came out in between. So there's been this in the past 3 or 4 years. There's been this huge influx of books and movies and biographies related to the Smiths. So I'm just really hoping that this can bring something new to the more to the people seeking more information. That isn't there, and a more visual representation of that history.
Well, it certainly does. And that's my conversational interview with Chrisoulis. And if you want to know any more information, the title of the book is called Tales of the Smiths, a graphic biography. And that's just come out on Omnibus Press. And I have to say, it is absolutely stunning. So if anybody's out there interested in the Smiths, or indie pop from that golden decade that was the 80s, then do just definitely check that out. Anyway, this is David Eastaugh on Future Radio. Like I said, if you want to contact us, we always love your messages. You can via the website, which is futureradio.co.uk, and use the instant messenger that you'll see there, or you can email, which is studio@futureradio.co.uk, and that will be all well and good. Now,